Sometimes the choices that define us happen when no one is watching. When we think success depends on being in the right place at the right time, life has a way of teaching us what truly matters. In ancient Norway, young warrior Halrik Stoneshoulder was running late for the most important meeting of his life. The mighty Jarl had summoned him to the great hall, a chance to join the elite warriors. But outside the village gates, an old man struggled alone with his broken wagon. Any smart warrior would have rushed past. This meeting could change everything. Instead, Halrik stopped to help. He spent precious time fixing the stranger's cart, sharing stories and wisdom. The young giant had no idea he was about to learn the most important lesson of his life. What happens when the person you help turns out to be the one testing you? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the fjords like the breath of sleeping giants. And in the village of Nordgard, the day began as it had for countless generations. Smoke rose from the longhouses in steady columns, carrying the scent of burning pine and breakfast porridge. The sound of hammers rang from the smithy, where sparks danced like tiny stars against the pre-dawn darkness. Halrik Stoneshoulder stood nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders casting shadows that could block sunlight from a grown man. His hands, calloused from years of sword work and honest labor, gripped the handle of his father's battle-axe, a massive iron weapon passed down through 3 generations of warriors. The axe head bore the scars of countless battles, each nick and dent telling stories of courage and sacrifice that stretched back to when his grandfather first wielded it against Danish raiders. But for all his imposing presence, Halrik carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that true strength came from within. His eyes, the color of winter storm clouds, held a thoughtfulness that set him apart from other warriors his age. Where others might swagger or boast, Halrik listened. Where others might rush to violence, he considered the consequences. "You're wool-gathering again, boy," Eric the Wise called from across the smithy courtyard. Despite being well past his 60th winter, Eric moved with the grace of a man half his age. His beard, white as fresh snow, was braided with small iron rings, each one representing a year of service to the village. "The sun won't wait for your daydreams," Halrik smiled, setting the axe carefully against the weapon rack. "Just thinking about the meeting today, Eric, it feels like everything changes after this morning." Eric's weathered face creased into a knowing expression. He had been like a father to Halrik since the boy's parents died in a winter plague 15 years ago. The old blacksmith had taken in the orphaned child, teaching him not just the craft of metalwork, but the deeper lessons of honor and responsibility. "Change comes whether we're ready or not," Eric said, pumping the bellows to stoke the forge fire. "The question is whether we meet it with wisdom or foolishness." The village of Nordgard, nestled between towering cliffs and the dark waters of the fjord, like a jewel set in ancient stone. 300 souls called it home, from newborn babes to white-haired elders who remembered when the great King Harald first united the scattered tribes. The longhouses, built from massive logs and topped with sod roofs, stood in orderly rows along cobbled streets. Gardens flourished between the buildings, tended by women who knew which herbs could heal a fever and which roots could sustain a family through the harshest winter. At the village's heart stood the Long Hall, a magnificent structure that could house the entire population during festivals and emergencies. Its carved dragon heads gazed out over the fjord, and its great doors had welcomed kings and jarls for over 2 centuries. This morning those doors would open for Halrik, if he proved worthy. "Tell me again about the Shield Brethren," Halrik said. Though he knew the answer by heart, Eric set down his hammer and fixed his apprentice with a serious look. "The Shield Brethren are more than warriors, Halrik. They're the Jarl's inner circle, his most trusted advisors and protectors. To be chosen means your voice carries weight in matters of war and peace. It means young warriors look to you as an example, and your word becomes bond for the entire village. But I'm not the strongest fighter," Halrik said, voicing the doubt that had plagued him for weeks. Bjorn Ironhand can swing a sword faster than any man in Nordgard, Eric agreed. Magnus Bloodfist has killed more enemies in single combat. But strength of arm isn't everything, lad. A true leader needs wisdom, compassion, and the ability to see beyond his own needs. As if summoned by his name, Bjorn Ironhand strode into the courtyard. Where Halrik was tall and thoughtful, Bjorn was compact and intense, a coiled spring always ready to unleash violence. His red hair blazed like fire in the morning light, and his green eyes held the calculating look of a predator sizing up prey. "Still playing with your toys, Stoneshoulder?" Bjorn sneered, gesturing at the forge. "Real warriors train with steel, not hammers and tongs." "Real warriors understand their weapons," Halrik replied calmly. "How can you trust a blade if you don't know how it was made?" Bjorn's laugh was sharp and mocking. "Philosophy won't save you when raiders come calling. The Jarl needs fighters, not thinkers." Before Halrik could respond, a gentle voice interrupted from the courtyard entrance. "Perhaps the Jarl needs both." Astrid Brightweaver stepped into view, carrying a basket of fresh bread from her family's bakery. Her blonde hair caught the morning light like spun gold, and her blue eyes held an intelligence that had drawn Halrik's attention since they were children. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her own worth, neither seeking attention nor avoiding it. "Lady Astrid," Bjorn said, his tone immediately shifting to something approaching politeness. "Surely you can see that strength matters more than—" "I can see that a village needs many kinds of strength," Astrid interrupted smoothly. "The strength to swing a sword, yes, but also the strength to make hard choices, to sacrifice for others, and to admit when you're wrong." Her eyes met Halrik's for just a moment, and he felt his heart skip like a stone on water. Bjorn's face flushed red, but before he could respond, the sound of a horn echoed across the village. 3 long blasts followed by 2 short ones, the signal that summoned all eligible warriors to the long hall. "The Jarl calls," Eric said, his voice heavy with significance. "This is your moment, lad. Remember what I've taught you." Halrik lifted his father's axe, feeling its familiar weight settle into his hands. The weapon had served 3 generations of his family with honor. Today, it would either help him claim his place among Nordgard's elite or bear witness to his failure. "Good fortune, Halrik," Astrid said quietly, placing a warm hand on his arm. "I believe in you." Bjorn had already stalked off toward the long hall, no doubt eager to impress the Jarl with his eagerness. Other warriors emerged from their homes and workshops, all converging on the great building like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Halrik took a deep breath, tasting salt from the fjord and smoke from the forges. This was his home, these were his people. Whatever happened in the long hall, he would face it with the same integrity that had guided his father and grandfather before him. "Eric," he said, turning back to his mentor, "what if I'm not ready?" The old blacksmith smiled, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been pride or secrets. "Son, readiness isn't about feeling prepared. It's about doing what's right when the moment comes, regardless of how you feel." As Halrik walked toward the long hall, he noticed details that would normally escape his attention. The way morning light painted the fjord waters silver and gold. The sound of children laughing as they chased chickens between the houses. The smell of baking bread mixing with the sharp scent of pine and sea spray. These were the things worth protecting. Not just the village itself, but the life it contained. The simple, precious moments that made existence meaningful. If the Shield Brethren stood guard over this, then perhaps he was ready after all. The long hall's great doors stood open, and from within came the low murmur of voices and the scrape of benches being arranged. Jarl Einar Greycloak awaited inside, the man whose word was law in Nordgard and whose judgment would shape Halrik's future. Taking one last look at his home bathed in morning light, Halrik Stoneshoulder stepped forward to meet his destiny, his father's axe steady in his grip and his heart full of purpose. The test was about to begin. Halrik's boots echoed against the cobblestones as he hurried through the village streets, the morning sun climbing higher with each passing moment. The horn's call had been clear. All eligible warriors were to present themselves at the long hall immediately. Yet as he rounded the corner near the baker's shop, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen beyond the confines of Jarl Einar's great hall. The village gates came into view, their massive oak timbers reinforced with iron bands that gleamed in the strengthening light. Beyond them lay the winding path that connected Nordgard to the wider world, a route traveled by merchants, messengers, and occasionally enemies. It was there, just outside the protective walls of his home, that Halrik's destiny would take an unexpected turn. An old man struggled beside a broken wagon, his weathered hands fumbling with a wheel that had come loose from its axle. The stranger wore a simple brown cloak that had seen better days, and his grey beard hung nearly to his chest. What struck Halrik most was not the man's obvious distress, but the dignified way he bore it. There was no cursing or dramatic gestures, just quiet determination in the face of adversity. The walking staff beside him was a thing of beauty despite its humble appearance. Carved from gnarled oak and etched with ancient runes, it spoke of craftsmanship and meaning that went far beyond mere utility. The staff seemed to pulse with history, as if it had witnessed countless journeys and supported many weary travelers. "Grandfather," Halrik called out, using the respectful term for any elder. "Do you need assistance?" The old man looked up, and Halrik found himself studying a face that bore the weathered lines of someone who had lived fully. The stranger's eyes were the deep blue of winter skies, holding depths that suggested wisdom hard-won through experience. "Young warrior," the old man said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to being heard, "I fear this wheel has chosen a most inconvenient moment to abandon its post. I am bound for the next settlement, but it seems my journey must wait." Halrik glanced toward the long hall, where he could hear voices growing louder as more warriors gathered. The meeting would begin soon, and his absence would be noted. Any sensible person would offer brief condolences and continue on their way. The Shield Brethren's selection happened perhaps once in a generation. Missing it would mean missing the opportunity of a lifetime. "Let me take a look," Halrik heard himself saying, setting down his father's axe and kneeling beside the wagon. The wheel had indeed come free, but the damage was repairable. The axle needed realignment, and the securing pin had worked loose, nothing that couldn't be fixed with the right tools and a steady hand. More concerning was the load the wagon carried, sacks of grain that suggested this man was traveling to feed others, not himself. "You're headed to Greystone Village?" Halrik asked, recognizing the type of grain from his years helping Eric with supply runs. "Indeed. Their harvest failed, and winter comes early this year. These supplies mean the difference between survival and suffering for many families." The old man's matter-of-fact tone made the statement all the more powerful. As they worked together to realign the wheel, Halrik found himself drawn into conversation with the stranger. There was something familiar about the man's bearing, the way he moved and spoke with quiet authority. When he offered advice about the repair, his knowledge of wagon construction was surprisingly detailed. "You've done this work before," Halrik observed, securing the wheel with a replacement pin from his belt pouch. "A man learns many skills over a long life," the stranger replied. "I've found that understanding how things work, whether wagons or people, serves one well in positions of responsibility." Something in that phrase made Halrik pause. Positions of responsibility. The words carried weight, as if spoken by someone who knew such positions intimately. "Tell me, young warrior," the old man continued, "what drives you to stop and help a stranger when clearly you have urgent business elsewhere?" Halrik considered the question as he tested the wheel's stability. From the long hall came the sound of the great doors closing. The meeting had begun without him. A cold knot formed in his stomach, but he pushed the feeling aside. "My father used to say that a man's true character shows not in how he treats his equals, but in how he treats those who can do nothing for him," Halrik answered. "Besides, this grain will feed families. That matters more than whatever opportunity I might miss." The old man nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied some unspoken test. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "Tell me about him," He died when I was 12, Halrik said, surprised by how easily the words came. Plague took both my parents that winter. But before he passed, he taught me that strength without purpose is merely violence, and that true honor comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And you believe this still? Even when such beliefs cost you personally? Halrik met the stranger's penetrating gaze. Especially then, anyone can do right when it's easy. The measure of a person comes when doing right requires sacrifice. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, the old man proving surprisingly capable despite his apparent frailty. His hands moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems, and his knowledge extended far beyond wagon repair. You mentioned positions of responsibility, Halrik said, as they lifted the grain sacks back into the wagon. What is your trade, grandfather? The old man's smile held secrets. I serve my community as best I can. Leadership, you might say, though the burden grows heavier with each passing year. Leadership is never easy, Halrik agreed. Eric the Wise taught me that a good leader serves his people, not the other way around. Eric is well known for his wisdom, the stranger said. And again, Halrik noted something oddly specific about the man's knowledge. Tell me, what qualities do you think make a true leader? The question seemed to hang in the morning air like mist over the fjord. Halrik found himself considering not just the words, but why this particular stranger would ask such a thing. Wisdom to see beyond the immediate, he said finally. Courage to make hard choices. Compassion to remember that decisions affect real people with real lives. And humility to admit when you're wrong. Many would list strength first, or fighting prowess. Strength fades with age, Halrik replied. Swords break, but character endures. The old man stood back, studying his young helper with obvious approval. The wagon is sound now, thanks to your skill. But tell me truthfully, do you regret missing whatever urgent business called you? Halrik looked toward the long hall, where the selection of new shield brethren was undoubtedly proceeding without him. By now, other warriors had claimed their places among the elite. Bjorn Ironhand was probably already receiving his silver arm ring, the symbol of his elevated status. I regret nothing, he said, and realized he meant it. This was the right choice. The old man picked up his walking staff, running his fingers along the carved runes with obvious affection. Young warrior, your parents would be proud of the man you've become. Hold fast to your principles. They will serve you better than any sword. As the stranger prepared to depart, he turned back one final time. Remember this morning, Halrik Stoneshoulder? Remember that sometimes the most important tests come disguised as simple choices. True leadership reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments when character matters more than opportunity. The use of his name stopped Halrik cold. He had never introduced himself to the stranger, yet the old man spoke it with casual familiarity. Before he could ask how this was possible, the wagon was already rolling away down the path, leaving only the echo of wheels on stone and the lingering scent of aged oak. Standing alone outside the village gates, Halrik felt the weight of what had just transpired. The meeting in the long hall was over, his chance at joining the Shield Brethren likely gone forever. Yet instead of regret, he felt something unexpected, a sense of completion, as if he had passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The walking staff's image stayed with him as he turned back toward the village. Those ancient runes had seemed familiar somehow, though he couldn't place where he might have seen them before. And the stranger's final words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the most important tests come disguised as simple choices. As he walked back through the gates of Nordgard, Halrik Stoneshoulder carried with him the certainty that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. The great doors of the long hall stood open like a mouth frozen in judgment as Halrik approached. Inside, the ceremony was concluding with the formal presentation of silver arm rings to the newly chosen Shield Brethren. Each ring was twisted from precious metal and bore the mark of Nordgard, a symbol of status that elevated its wearer above common warriors. Bjorn Ironhand stood at the center of the hall, His chest puffed with pride, as Jarl Einar's representative placed the gleaming band around his muscular forearm. Magnus Bloodfist received his ring next, followed by 3 other warriors whose names would now be spoken with respect throughout the village. The silver caught the torchlight, seeming to glow with its own inner fire. "Behold the new shield brethren of Nordgard," announced Gunnar the Skald, the Jarl's chief advisor and keeper of traditions. "Let all know that these men have proven themselves worthy to stand at their lord's right hand." A cheer rose from the assembled crowd, but Halrik noticed how several eyes turned toward the entrance where he stood. Whispers began to spread like ripples on still water. Where had Halrik Stoneshoulder been during the selection? Why had the strongest warrior in Nordgard failed to answer his Jarl's call? "Late to your own destiny, weren't you?" came a mocking voice from behind him. Olaf Whitecloak, one of Bjorn's close friends, wore a smirk that made Halrik's jaw clench. "Tell me, giant, what could possibly have been more important than this?" "Family business," Halrik replied quietly, not entirely lying. In a way, helping the old stranger had felt like honoring his father's teachings about duty to others. "Family?" Olaf laughed, loud enough to draw more attention. "The only family you have is Eric the blacksmith, and he's been working the forge all morning. Face it, Stoneshoulder, you simply weren't brave enough to face judgment." The accusation of cowardice hung in the air like smoke from a quenched torch. Several young warriors nodded in agreement, their faces showing the cruel satisfaction of watching a giant fall. Halrik felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Courage takes many forms," Eric the Wise said, emerging from the crowd with his leather apron still tight around his waist. "Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is follow his conscience, regardless of what others think." "Pretty words," Bjorn called out, having overheard the exchange. His new silver arm ring caught the light as he gestured dismissively. "But the Shield Brethren need fighters, not philosophers. Perhaps it's better that some people know their limitations." The gathered crowd murmured at this public challenge. In Viking society, such words demanded either a response in kind or acceptance of subordination. Halrik felt every eye in the hall upon him, waiting to see how he would react to this deliberate provocation. "I know my limitations," Halrik said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I also know my values. Sometimes they don't align with opportunity." Before the situation could escalate further, Eric placed a firm hand on Halrik's shoulder. "Come, lad, there's work to be done at the forge." As they walked away from the long hall, Halrik could hear the celebration resuming behind them. The new Shield Brethren would spend the day receiving congratulations and admiring their silver rings. Meanwhile, he would return to hammering iron and wondering if he had made the right choice. Regrets? Eric asked as they entered the familiar warmth of the smithy. "None," Halrik replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "But I wonder what father would have thought." "Your father would have been proud," Eric said firmly. He understood that true honor sometimes requires sacrifice. They worked in comfortable silence for a time, the rhythm of hammer on anvil providing a steady counterpoint to Halrik's churning thoughts. The iron responded to his touch as it always had, yielding to pressure and heat to become something stronger and more useful than its raw form. It was while shaping a horseshoe that Astrid appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from hurrying. She had clearly heard about his absence from the ceremony, and her expression mixed concern with something that might have been pride. "I brought fresh bread," she said, setting down a cloth-wrapped loaf that filled the smithy with the scent of wheat and honey. "And I wanted to hear what really happened this morning." Halrik found himself telling her about the old man and the broken wagon, about the choice between duty to the Jarl and duty to a stranger in need. As he spoke, Astrid's eyes never left his face, and he saw understanding there rather than judgment. "You did the right thing," she said when he finished. "That grain will feed families who might otherwise starve. That matters more than any silver ring." "Tell that to the village," Halrik replied with a rueful smile. "Half of Nordgard thinks I'm a coward, and the other half thinks I'm a fool. And what do you think?" Astrid asked, her voice gentle but probing. Halrik considered the question while the forge fire crackled between them. What did he think? In truth, he felt strangely at peace with his choice, despite the social consequences. I think that old man needed help, and I was in a position to provide it, he said finally. Everything else is just noise, Eric nodded approvingly from his workbench. Wisdom beyond your years, lad. The silver rings mark status, but they don't create character. That comes from within. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of running feet approached the smithy. Young Tormund, barely 16 and eager to prove himself, burst through the doorway with news that would change everything. Eric! Halrik! He gasped, struggling to catch his breath. Riders approached from the east, clan Bloodaxe scouts by their banners. 3 of them, armed and riding hard toward our borders. The implications hit immediately. Clan Bloodaxe had been testing Nordgard's defenses for months, probing for weaknesses and gauging their readiness for war. The appearance of armed scouts meant the situation was escalating beyond mere posturing. How far out? Eric asked, his voice taking on the hard edge of a man who had faced raiders before. 2 hours, maybe less. They're pushing their horses hard. Halrik set down his hammer and reached for his father's battle-axe. Whatever personal drama surrounded his absence from the Shield Brethren selection would have to wait. Nordgard faced a real threat, and every capable warrior would be needed. Go to the Long Hall, Eric instructed Tormund. Tell Gunnar the Skald what you've seen. And find Magnus Bloodfist. Tell him to gather a patrol. As the boy ran off to deliver his message, Halrik checked his weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. The familiar weight of his father's axe provided comfort and focus. This was what he had trained for, protecting his people from those who would do them harm. Be careful, Astrid said, her hand briefly touching his arm. Come back to us, always, Halrik promised, meaning it with every fiber of his being, as he headed toward the village gates where the patrol would assemble. Halrik reflected on how quickly circumstances could change. This morning he had been a warrior seeking advancement. Now he was simply a defender of his home, and somehow that felt more honest than any silver ring ever could. The Horn of Gathering hung in the Long Hall's rafters like a sleeping dragon, its curved surface polished smooth by generations of hands. When Gunnar the Skald lifted it to his lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, followed by a long, mournful note, every soul in Nordgard knew that danger approached their home. The ancient horn's voice carried across the fjord, echoing off stone cliffs and calling the scattered to assembly. Halrik arrived at the village gates to find Magnus Bloodfist already organizing a patrol. The newly appointed shield brother wore his silver arm ring with obvious pride, but his expression was grim as he distributed weapons and assigned positions. Whatever personal animosity existed between warriors would have to wait. Clan Bloodaxe scouts meant serious trouble. Stoneshoulder, Magnus called out, his tone strictly professional. Take the high path along the ridge. Your eyes are sharp, and we need early warning if more riders follow these 3. Halrik nodded, appreciating that Magnus had set aside politics for practical necessity. The high path was dangerous, but offered the best vantage point for spotting approaching enemies. It also meant working alone, which suited his current mood perfectly. As he climbed the rocky trail that wound up the cliff face, Halrik found himself thinking about the mysterious old man from that morning. Something about the stranger's bearing had suggested familiarity with military matters, the way he spoke of positions of responsibility, his knowledge that seemed to extend beyond a simple traveler's experience. The ridge path leveled out into a natural observation post where previous generations had built a simple stone shelter. From here, the entire approach to Nordgard lay spread below like a living map. The fjord stretched toward the horizon, its dark waters reflecting mountain peaks like a mirror of stone and sky. Movement caught his eye, 3 riders pushing their horses hard along the coastal trail. Even at this distance, their red and black banners were unmistakable. Clan Bloodaxe had indeed sent scouts, but these men rode with the urgency of messengers rather than the caution of spies. Halrik was about to signal the village when he noticed something else. A 4th figure on foot, moving with deliberate purpose through the forest below. The person wore a brown cloak and carried a walking staff, moving with the measured pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The old man from this morning was somehow here, in the wilderness between Nordgard and potential danger. What possible reason could a simple traveler have for being in such a place at such a time? Before Halrik could puzzle out this mystery further, the Blood Axe scouts reached the agreed-upon meeting point, an ancient stone circle that marked the boundary between clan territories. What happened next defied all expectation. Instead of preparing for conflict, the lead scout dismounted and approached the cloaked figure with obvious deference. They spoke briefly, too distant for Halrik to hear words, but their body language suggested negotiation rather than confrontation. Minutes passed. Then, to Halrik's amazement, the scouts remounted their horses and rode back the way they had come, their urgent mission apparently abandoned. The mysterious figure watched them go, then continued walking toward Nordgard, as if nothing unusual had happened. Halrik scrambled down the ridge path, his mind racing with questions. By the time he reached the village gates, the patrol was already dispersing, having seen the scouts retreat without explanation. Magnus Bloodfist looked puzzled but relieved. A confrontation had been avoided, though no one understood why. "What did you see up there?" Magnus asked as Halrik approached. "The scouts turned back," Halrik reported truthfully, though he kept the details of the mysterious meeting to himself. Something told him that information needed more careful consideration. "Turned back?" Bjorn Ironhand had arrived, his new silver ring catching the afternoon light. "Blood Axe warriors don't simply turn back. They must have seen our defenses and decided we're too strong to challenge." The explanation satisfied most of the gathered warriors, but Halrik noticed Eric the Wise watching him with thoughtful eyes. The old blacksmith had a talent for reading faces, and Halrik's expression apparently told a story worth investigating. "Walk with me." "Lad," Eric said quietly, leading Halrik away from the dispersing crowd. They strolled toward the harbour, where fishing boats bobbed at anchor like sleeping seabirds. The afternoon sun painted the water gold and silver, and the familiar sounds of village life, children playing, women calling to each other across garden fences. The ring of hammer on anvil provided a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "You saw something up there," Eric said. It wasn't a question. Halrik found himself describing the encounter between the cloaked figure and the Blood Axe scouts. Eric listened without interruption, his weathered face betraying no surprise at the strange tale. "The same old man who detained you this morning?" Eric asked when Halrik finished. "I believe so. Same cloak, same walking staff. But Eric, how could he have gotten there so quickly? And why would enemy scouts show him such respect?" Eric was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the fjord where evening mist was beginning to gather. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of carefully chosen words. "Sometimes, lad, people are not who they appear to be. And sometimes the most important meetings happen where we least expect them." "You know something about this," Halrik said, recognizing the tone Eric used when he had knowledge he wasn't ready to share. "I know that mysterious strangers rarely appear by accident," Eric replied. "And I know that your choice this morning, helping that old man instead of attending the Shield Brethren, selection may have been more significant than either of us realized." As they walked back toward the village center, Halrik noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. There, outside the long hall, stood the same cloaked figure from the wilderness. The man leaned on his carved walking staff, speaking quietly with several village elders. His presence seemed perfectly natural, as if he belonged in Nordgard despite being a stranger. "How did he get here so fast?" Halrik whispered. "Perhaps," Eric said with a mysterious smile. "He never really left." Before Halrik could ask what that cryptic statement meant, Astrid approached with news that would reshape his understanding of the day's events. "The Jarl has returned," she said, her voice carrying excitement and concern in equal measure. "He's been away for 3 weeks on a diplomatic mission, but riders say he'll arrive before sunset. There are rumors that he brings important news about the Blood Axe situation." Halrik felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to shift in his mind, though the complete picture remained frustratingly unclear. A mysterious old man who commanded respect from enemy scouts, a Jarl returning from secret diplomacy, and his own choice to help a stranger instead of seeking advancement. Somehow these events were connected in ways he couldn't yet fathom. "Come," Eric said, placing a hand on Halrik's shoulder. "Let's return to the forge. I have a feeling this day isn't finished with us yet." As they walked away from the harbour, Halrik glanced back at the cloaked figure outside the long hall. For just a moment their eyes met across the distance, and the old man nodded slightly, a gesture that might have been greeting or acknowledgement or something else entirely. The shield of Nordgard hung above the great hearth in the long hall, its ancient surface bearing scars from battles fought before Halrik's grandfather was born. Fashioned from iron and oak by the village's first blacksmith, it bore the coat of arms that had protected this community for 7 generations. A golden dragon coiled around a silver tree, symbolizing strength rooted in wisdom. Tonight, that shield would witness discussions that could determine whether Nordgard survived the coming winter. Jarl Einar Greycloak had arrived at sunset, riding through the village gates with a small escort and an expression that revealed nothing of his diplomatic mission. He was a man of medium height but commanding presence, his grey beard neatly braided and his dark eyes holding the accumulated wisdom of 40 winters. Unlike many leaders who relied on display and ceremony, the Jarl's authority came from quiet competence and unwavering integrity. The long hall filled quickly as word spread of an emergency assembly. Warriors, craftsmen, merchants, and elders took their places on wooden benches, arranged in concentric circles around the central fire pit. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the carved pillars that supported the roof, creating an atmosphere both intimate and solemn. Halrik found himself seated near the back, his exclusion from the Shield Brethren clearly reflected in his positioning. Bjorn Ironhand and the other newly appointed warriors occupied places of honor close to the Jarl's high seat, their silver arm rings gleaming in the firelight. Yet as he surveyed the assembled crowd, Halrik noticed something interesting. Many of the village's most respected elders kept glancing in his direction, their expressions thoughtful rather than dismissive. "People of Nordgard," Jarl Einar began, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "I bring news from my negotiations with Clan Bloodaxe and their allies. The situation is more grave than we previously understood." A murmur ran through the assembly. Everyone had known tensions were rising, but the Jarl's tone suggested something beyond mere border disputes. "Thane Ragnar Bloodaxe has formed an alliance with 3 other clans," the Jarl continued. "Together, they control territory from the northern fjords to the eastern mountains. They demand tribute from all smaller settlements, tribute that would leave us unable to feed our own families." The hall erupted in angry voices. Vikings might fight each other with enthusiasm, but the idea of submitting to such extortion violated every principle of independence and self-determination. "What of King Magnus?" called out Olaf the shipwright. "Surely he won't permit such aggression in his territory." The Jarl's expression darkened. "The king has problems of his own with Danish raiders along the southern coast. He cannot spare troops to protect every village, and Bloodaxe knows this. We stand alone." Bjorn Ironhand rose from his position near the front. "Then we fight," he declared, his voice ringing with youthful confidence. "Nordgard has never bowed to threats, and we won't start now." Cheers erupted from many of the younger warriors, but Halrik noticed that the older veterans remained silent. Eric the Wise sat with his arms folded, his expression troubled. These men had fought real battles and understood that courage alone wouldn't overcome superior numbers. "Fighting may indeed be necessary," the Jarl agreed, "but we must be smart about how we fight. Bloodaxe commands over 300 warriors. We have fewer than 80 capable of bearing arms." The stark mathematics sobered the hall immediately. Even the most enthusiastic young fighters understood that such odds meant annihilation if they faced the enemy in open battle. "What do you propose, my lord?" asked Gunnar the Skald. "We need new tactics," the Jarl replied. "New strategies that turn our knowledge of this land into an advantage. We need leaders who can think beyond traditional approaches to warfare." As he spoke these words, Halrik felt the weight of many eyes upon him. It seemed impossible that the Jarl was somehow referencing his absence from the Shield Brethren selection, yet the coincidence felt too pointed to ignore. "I would hear suggestions," the Jarl continued, "from all members of our community, regardless of rank or status. In desperate times, wisdom can come from unexpected sources." The invitation hung in the air, like smoke from the central fire. Several established warriors began to speak at once, but the Jarl held up a hand for silence. "Let each person speak in turn," he said, "and let each idea be judged on its merit, not on who offers it." Magnus Bloodfist was the first to respond, outlining a defensive strategy based on fortifying the village and waiting for the enemy to attack established positions. It was a sound plan, but as he spoke, Halrik could see its limitations. Nordgard's walls were strong, but not impregnable, and a siege would eventually starve them out. Bjorn Ironhand followed with a proposal for preemptive strikes against enemy camps. His enthusiasm was admirable, but the plan relied on achieving surprise against an enemy that outnumbered them 4-1. A dangerous gamble at best. As the discussion continued, Halrik found himself studying the shield of Nordgard above the hearth. The dragon coiled around the tree reminded him of something the mysterious old man had said that morning about understanding how things worked. Perhaps the key wasn't to fight the enemy's strength, but to use their size and confidence against them. "May I speak?" Halrik asked, rising from his place in the back. A few snickers came from the younger warriors, but the Jarl nodded gravely. "The floor recognizes Halrik Stoneshoulder, my lord," Halrik began, his voice steady despite the attention of the entire assembly. "We've been thinking about this as if we must meet Bloodaxe in the kind of battle they expect. But what if we don't?" "Explain," the Jarl commanded. "A large army is like a great ship," Halrik said, warming to his theme. "Powerful, but slow to change direction. They'll expect us to either hide behind our walls or meet them in open combat. What if we do neither?" He outlined a strategy based on mobility and knowledge of local terrain. Small groups could harass enemy supply lines, strike at night, and disappear into forests and caves that only locals knew. It would be a war of attrition rather than decisive battle, unglamorous but potentially effective. As he spoke, Halrik noticed something remarkable happening. The veteran warriors were nodding in approval, their expressions showing recognition of tactical wisdom. Even more surprising, the mysterious cloaked figure had somehow entered the hall during the discussion and now stood near the great doors. Listening intently, when Halrik finished his presentation, the hall fell silent. The Jarl stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "These are the thoughts of someone who understands warfare beyond mere fighting," the Jarl said finally. "Tell me, young warrior, where did you learn such strategy?" "From watching, my lord," Halrik replied honestly, "and from understanding that strength takes many forms." The Jarl's eyes seemed to twinkle with something that might have been amusement or approval. "Indeed it does. We will consider all proposals carefully before making our decision." As the assembly began to break up, Halrik felt a mixture of satisfaction and uncertainty. He had spoken his mind and been heard with respect, but the greater challenges still lay ahead. Nordgard's survival would depend on more than clever tactics. It would require unity, sacrifice, and leadership of the highest order. The Jarl's seal ring caught the morning light as Einar Greycloak turned it slowly on his finger, a habit that emerged whenever he faced difficult decisions. The gold band bore the sacred symbol of Nordgard's leadership, a raven perched on a sword, representing the balance between wisdom and strength that had guided the village for generations. Today, that balance would be tested as never before. 3 days had passed since the emergency assembly, and the threat from Clan Bloodaxe had crystallized into something far more immediate. Scout reports indicated that Thane Ragnar was moving his forces southward, no longer content to send mere messengers. The alliance of clans had grown bold, and Nordgard stood directly in their path to controlling the entire coastal region. Halrik found himself in an unexpected position following his tactical presentation. While he remained excluded from the formal Shield Brethren, the Jarl had quietly assigned him to lead scouting missions and coordinate intelligence gathering. It was work that suited his observational skills and put him in contact with every capable warrior in the village. The morning training sessions had taken on new urgency. As the reality of impending conflict sank in, veterans drilled alongside eager youngsters, sharing hard-won knowledge about fighting in formation and surviving in hostile territory. Halrik moved between groups, offering suggestions and noting each man's strengths and weaknesses. "Your mobility tactics are sound," Magnus Bloodfist admitted privately as they watched a group practice moving silently through the forest. "I've been thinking about how to implement them with our limited numbers." The acknowledgement meant more to Halrik than he expected. Magnus might wear the silver arm ring, but his military experience was extensive, and his opinion carried weight among the warriors. "The key is avoiding their strength while exploiting our advantages," Halrik replied. "We know every trail, every cave, every hidden valley within 20 miles. They'll be fighting blind while we see everything." As they talked, the mysterious old man appeared on the forest path, moving with that same measured pace Halrik remembered from their first encounter. The stranger seemed to have taken up residence in the village, though no one questioned his presence or asked about his business. People simply accepted him as if he belonged. "Grandfather," Halrik called out respectfully, "would you care to share your thoughts on our preparations?" The old man approached, his carved walking staff supporting each deliberate step. His keen eyes surveyed the training warriors with obvious interest, taking in details that suggested military experience despite his humble appearance. "Young men preparing for war," he observed quietly. "It reminds me of my own youth, though the circumstances were different then." "You were a warrior?" Magnus asked with surprise. "Every man who lives long enough becomes a warrior of some kind," the stranger replied. "The question is whether he learns to fight for the right reasons." There was something in his tone that made both younger men pay closer attention. The old man spoke with the authority of someone who had faced genuine combat, not just village disputes or cattle raids. "What would you consider the right reasons?" Halrik asked. "Protecting what cannot protect itself," came the immediate reply. "Fighting not for glory or conquest, but because someone must stand between the innocent and those who would do them harm." The words echoed principles that Halrik's father had taught him, and he felt a strange kinship with this weathered stranger. There was wisdom here, earned through experiences that went far beyond helping with broken wagons. "Thane Ragnar fights for different reasons," Magnus observed. "Indeed," the old man agreed. "He fights for power, for the satisfaction of imposing his will on others. Such motivations make a man dangerous, but also predictable." "How so?" Halrik asked, genuinely curious. "A leader who fights only for dominance will always choose the most direct path to victory. He expects others to be motivated by fear and greed as he is. This blinds him to more subtle approaches." As if summoned by their discussion of strategy, Astrid appeared on the forest path carrying a basket of food for the training warriors. Her presence lifted Halrik's spirits, as it always did, but today her expression carried worry alongside her usual warmth. "The women have been talking," she said without preamble. "There's word that Blood Axe agents have been seen in nearby settlements, asking questions about our defenses and counting our warriors." The implications were troubling. If enemy spies were gathering detailed intelligence, any advantage Nordgard might have gained through preparation could be neutralized before the fighting began. "We need better security around the village," Magnus said grimly. "No strangers allowed past the gates without proper escort." The old man's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement. "An interesting challenge, given that I myself am a stranger who walks freely among you." "You're different," Halrik said instinctively. "You helped when help was needed. Your actions speak for your character." Character, the stranger mused. Yes, that does tend to reveal itself in unexpected ways. Tell me, young warrior, what have you learned about character through this crisis? The question seemed designed to probe deeper than mere military planning. Halrik considered it carefully while watching the training exercises continue around them. I've learned that courage means different things to different people, he said finally. Some find it in charging toward danger. Others find it in making hard choices that others might not understand. And which kind do you believe Nordgard needs most? Before Halrik could answer, the sound of running feet announced urgent news. Tormund the messenger burst from the forest path, his face flushed with exertion and alarm. "Ships in the fjord!" he gasped. 3 longships flying blood-axe banners approaching fast. The training session dissolved into organized chaos as warriors grabbed weapons and rushed toward the village. This was no longer preparation or planning. The enemy had arrived earlier than anyone expected. "They're not attacking," Tormund continued as they ran. "The ships carry envoys under a peace banner. They're requesting a formal meeting with our leadership." Magnus and Halrik exchanged glances. A diplomatic approach meant either genuine negotiation or an elaborate trap. Either way, how Nordgard responded would determine whether they faced immediate battle or had time for final preparations. "The Jarl will want to hear this immediately," Magnus said. As they approached the village gates, Halrik noticed that the old man had somehow kept pace despite his apparent age and walking staff. The stranger's stamina seemed as mysterious as everything else about him. "What do you make of this diplomatic gesture?" Halrik asked him. "Sometimes," the old man replied thoughtfully, "the most important negotiations happen before anyone realizes they're negotiating." The cryptic response added another layer to the growing mystery surrounding the stranger's identity. But as they entered Nordgard to find the Jarl already organizing a response to the Bloodaxe envoys, Halrik pushed his questions aside. Whatever secrets the old man carried, they would have to wait. Nordgard's immediate survival took precedence. Over all other concerns, the seal ring on the Jarl's finger would soon face its greatest test. The disguise cloak lay, folded on a simple wooden chair in the chamber behind the longhall. Its brown wool fabric bearing the scent of forest paths and countless journeys. To most eyes it appeared to be nothing more than a traveller's garment, humble, practical, unremarkable. But for 3 weeks, this simple cloak had concealed one of the most important deceptions in Nordgard's history. Halrik stood in the doorway of the chamber, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. The mysterious old man who had taught him about character and wisdom, who had helped turn away enemy scouts with a few words, who had appeared at crucial moments throughout the village crisis, was methodically removing the disguise that had hidden his true identity. The grey beard came away first, revealing a strong jaw that Halrik recognized from countless formal ceremonies. The stooped posture straightened into the commanding bearing of a born leader. The weathered hands that had helped repair a wagon wheel removed a cunningly crafted mask that had aged their owner by 20 years. "Jarl Einar," Halrik whispered, though the evidence before his eyes made the question unnecessary. "Sit down, lad," the Jarl said gently, his voice now carrying the familiar authority that had guided Nordgard for 15 years. "I imagine you have questions." Halrik sank into the offered chair, his father's battle-axe forgotten in his grip as he tried to reconcile this revelation with everything he thought he understood about recent events. The old man who had praised his character, who had spoken of leadership and sacrifice, who had somehow commanded respect from enemy scouts, all of it had been Jarl Einar in disguise. "The broken wagon," Halrik said slowly. "That morning when I missed the Shield Brethren selection, that was intentional. Everything was intentional," the Jarl confirmed, settling into his own chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years. "The wagon, the philosophical discussions, even my apparent absence during the diplomatic mission. It was all designed to test something that couldn't be measured in a formal ceremony." "Test what?" "Character under pressure," Einar replied. "Leadership when no one is watching. The quality that matters most when everything depends on doing The right thing rather than the expected thing. The pieces began falling into place in Halrik's mind, like stones, finding their proper positions in a wall. The Jarl's mysterious absence during the crisis, the old man's uncanny knowledge of military strategy, the way enemy scouts had shown deference to a simple traveler, it all made sense now. You were evaluating potential successors, Halrik said, understanding flooding through him. Among other things, the Jarl admitted, but not in the way you might think. This wasn't about choosing who would replace me immediately. This was about understanding who could lead Nordgard through the challenges that lie ahead. The Blood Axe Alliance is real and dangerous, Einar interrupted, but it's also an opportunity to see how our people respond under genuine pressure. Silver arm rings mark status, Halrik, but they don't create leaders. Leadership reveals itself through choices made when personal cost is involved. Halrik felt a mixture of anger and admiration wash over him. The manipulation was extensive and sophisticated, yet the underlying purpose was sound. Still, the deception rankled. So when I helped repair your wagon instead of attending the selection ceremony, you were testing my priorities. I was observing them, the Jarl corrected. There's a difference. A test implies that there were right and wrong answers. What I witnessed was simply you being yourself when you thought no one important was watching, and the discussions about leadership, about character, were genuine conversations between two people exploring important ideas, Einar said firmly. The fact that I was disguised didn't make the wisdom any less real or the questions any less meaningful. The Jarl rose and walked to the chamber's single window, gazing out at the village he had protected and guided for so many years. His shoulders bore the invisible weight of countless decisions, each one affecting the lives of people who trusted him with their welfare. 15 years ago, when I became Jarl, I was young and certain that strength alone could solve any problem, he said quietly. Experience taught me that leadership requires something deeper than physical prowess or tactical brilliance. It requires the wisdom to put others' needs before your own, even when doing so costs you personally, like helping a stranger instead of advancing your career. Exactly like that. Einar turned back to face Halrik, his expression serious but not unkind. Do you understand why I needed to see that quality before the real crisis began? Halrik considered the question, while pieces of recent events rearranged themselves in his understanding. The Shield Brethren selection, his exclusion from formal recognition, the growing respect from veterans who saw past political considerations. It was all connected to this larger evaluation, because when the fighting starts, people need leaders they can trust completely, he said finally. Not just leaders who can fight well or give orders, but leaders who will sacrifice for others without expecting reward. Now you begin to understand, the Jarl said with approval. But there's more you need to know before we face what's coming. He moved to a chest near the window and withdrew several documents that bore official seals. The papers rustled as he spread them on a small table, revealing maps, correspondence, and what appeared to be intelligence reports. My diplomatic mission was real, but its purpose wasn't what people assumed, Einar explained. I wasn't trying to negotiate with Clan Blood Axe. I was building alliances with their enemies and gathering intelligence about their true capabilities. The maps showed troop movements and supply lines that extended far beyond what Nordgard's scouts had reported. The Blood Axe Alliance was even larger and better organized than anyone had suspected, but it also had vulnerabilities that careful planning might exploit. The envoys who arrived today, Halrik said, studying the documents. They're not here to negotiate terms of surrender. They're here to assess our readiness and gather final intelligence before the main assault, the Jarl confirmed. Which means we have perhaps 2 days before they attack in force. The revelation hit Halrik like a physical blow. Everything, the training, the strategic planning, the community preparations, had been building toward a confrontation that was now imminent. 2 days to prepare for a battle. Against impossible odds, he said. 2 days to prove that character. Matters more than numbers, Einar corrected. 2 days to show that a people united by principle can overcome forces motivated only by greed and ambition. The Jarl moved to where the disguise cloak lay folded and picked it up with something approaching affection. The simple garment had served its purpose, allowing him to observe and evaluate without the formal barriers that surrounded his office. "I have one more thing to tell you," Einar said, his voice carrying the weight of momentous decision. "Tomorrow, when the envoys return to their ships, I will announce my choice for war leader, the person who will coordinate our defense and, if necessary, guide our people if I fall in battle." Halrik felt his breath catch in his throat. The implications were staggering, not just for him personally, but for the entire future of Nordgard. "The Shield Brethren won't understand," he said quietly. "I was excluded from their ranks. How can I lead warriors who outrank me?" "Leadership isn't about rank, lad," the Jarl replied with a slight smile. "It's about earning the trust and respect of those you serve. You've been doing that for days without realizing it. The veterans see your tactical wisdom, the younger warriors respect your strength, and the people trust your judgment because they've witnessed your character." The weight of responsibility settled on Halrik's shoulders like a heavy cloak. Everything he had learned about himself through this crisis, every choice he had made when he thought no one was watching, had led to this moment. "I'm not ready," he said honestly. "No one ever is," Jarl Einar replied. "But readiness isn't about feeling prepared. It's about doing what's necessary when the time comes, regardless of how you feel about it." As if to underscore the point, the sound of the evening horn drifted through the window, 3 long blasts calling the village to assembly. Tomorrow would bring decisions that would determine whether Nordgard survived as a free community or fell to those who valued power over principle. The disguise had served its purpose, but the real test was just beginning. The war paint bowl sat in the center of the preparation chamber, its ancient ceramic surface dark with the residue of countless ceremonies, carved with symbols that predated written memory. The bowl contained sacred blue war paint made from ground minerals and blessed herbs, a mixture that had marked Nordgard's warriors for battle across 7 generations. Tonight it would transform ordinary men into something more, binding them together in purpose as they faced the greatest threat their village had ever known. Dawn was still hours away when Halrik entered the chamber where final preparations were taking place. The announcement of his appointment as war leader had rippled through Nordgard like wildfire, generating reactions that ranged from surprise to skepticism to grudging respect. Now, as battle approached with the rising sun, those reactions would be tested against the reality of leadership under pressure. Magnus Bloodfist was already present, methodically checking weapons and equipment with the thoroughness of a veteran warrior. His silver arm ring caught the torchlight as he worked, but his expression showed none of the resentment Halrik might have expected. Instead, the older warrior's face reflected the grim focus of someone who understood that personal grievances meant nothing when survival was at stake. "The perimeter scouts report movement in the forest," Magnus said without looking up from his sword maintenance. "Blood Axe forces are positioning for dawn assault just as you predicted. Numbers?" Ulrich asked, settling beside the war paint bowl and beginning his own ritual preparations. "At least 200 visible, but they're being careful to stay hidden. Could be twice that many once they commit to the attack." The mathematics remained daunting. Even with every able-bodied person in Nordgard taking up arms, they would be outnumbered 3 to 1 by experienced warriors. Traditional Viking tactics demanded either overwhelming force or retreat to defensible positions, neither option available to them. Bjorn Ironhand entered the chamber with several other shield brethren, their expressions a mixture of determination and barely concealed doubt. The newly appointed warriors had trained hard for their positions, but this would be their first real test of leadership under fire. "The defensive positions are ready," Bjorn reported, his voice carefully neutral. "Archers stationed on the walls, barricades prepared at each gate, and the evacuation routes cleared for non-combatants." "Good," Halrik acknowledged. "But remember, we're not planning to hide behind walls and wait for them to break through. This is about mobility, surprise, and making them fight our kind of battle instead of theirs. He outlined the final tactical details while applying the sacred war paint to his face and arms. The blue pigment felt cold against his skin, but as it dried, he felt the spiritual transformation that had marked his people's warriors since ancient times. This wasn't merely decoration, it was a declaration that ordinary concerns no longer applied. The death held no fear for someone fighting to protect everything he held dear. Eric the Wise appeared in the doorway carrying Halrik's father's battle axe. The old blacksmith had spent the night making final adjustments to weapons and equipment, ensuring that every blade was sharp and every piece of armor properly fitted. "Your father would be proud," Eric said simply, offering the axe with both hands in the traditional manner. The weapon felt heavier than usual as Halrik accepted it, weighted not just with iron and oak, but with the responsibility of leadership and the expectations of everyone who would follow him into battle. 3 generations of his family had carried this axe into combat, and today it would either help him protect Nordgard or bear witness to his failure. "Eric," Halrik said quietly, "if things go badly, they won't," the old blacksmith interrupted firmly. "Not because you're invincible, but because you understand what you're fighting for. That makes all the difference." Astrid entered the chamber carrying a bundle wrapped in soft wool. Her presence brought a moment of warmth to the grim preparations, but her expression carried the weight of someone saying what might be final words. "I brought something for you," she said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a mail shirt that gleamed with fresh oil and careful maintenance. "It belonged to my grandfather. He wore it through 15 battles and died peacefully in his bed at 83 winters. The gift was both practical and deeply personal. Mail shirts were valuable beyond mere monetary worth. They represented protection, legacy, and the faith of those who offered them. Accepting it meant accepting the responsibility to survive, to return to the people who cared about him. "I'll wear it with honor," Halrik promised, his voice thick with emotion. "See that you do," Astrid replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And see that you come back to me. We have plans to make once this is over." The confession of future hopes hit Halrik like a physical blow. In the midst of preparing for battle, the reminder of what he might lose or might gain added another layer to his motivation. As the chamber filled with the final group of warriors who would lead Nordgard's defense, Halrik studied each face around the war paint bowl. These were men who had grown up together, trained together, and now would fight together against overwhelming odds. Some were proven veterans like Magnus, others were untested but eager like Bjorn, and a few were older warriors whose experience dated back to previous conflicts. "Before we begin the final ritual," Halrik said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I want each of you to understand something. We're not fighting this battle because we expect to win easily. We're fighting because some things are worth the risk of everything." He gestured toward the village beyond the chamber walls, where families slept fitfully in their homes, trusting that their warriors would protect them from those who sought to impose their will through violence. "Out there are children who deserve to grow up free, elders who've earned peaceful final years, and craftsmen whose skills enrich all our lives," Halrik continued. "We fight not for glory or conquest, but to preserve a way of life that values honor over power and community over individual ambition." Magnus nodded approvingly. "Well spoken. But how do we turn noble intentions into tactical victory?" "By remembering that Thane Ragnar expects us to fight like Vikings," Halrik replied. "Honor-bound, predictable, committed to face-to-face combat, even when it means certain death. Instead, we're going to fight like defenders of home, smart, adaptable, and willing to do whatever it takes to protect what we love." He outlined the battle plan one final time, emphasizing flexibility over rigid adherence to traditional formations. Small groups would harass enemy flanks, while the main force conducted a fighting retreat through prepared positions. The goal was not to crush the enemy in single combat, but to make their victory so costly that they would eventually withdraw. "What about their superior numbers?" Bjorn asked. Numbers only matter if they can bring them all to bear at once, Halrik explained. We control the terrain, we know the escape routes, and we're fighting for our homes while they're fighting for someone else's ambition. Those advantages are worth more than raw numbers if we use them wisely. Jarl Einar entered the chamber as the first pale light of dawn began filtering through the windows. He wore his finest armor and bore the ceremonial sword that marked his authority, but his expression was that of a father sending his sons into danger. "The time has come," he announced solemnly. "Thane Ragnar's forces are moving into final position. They'll attack within the hour." The warriors began applying the sacred war paint, each man marking himself according to tradition and personal preference. The blue pigment transformed their faces into masks of determination and spiritual preparation, marking the transition from peaceful villagers to deadly protectors. "Remember," Halrik said as they completed the ritual, "we're not just fighting for victory today. We're fighting to prove that character and community can overcome greed and ambition. Win or lose, let our actions today show future generations what it means to stand for something greater than ourselves." The war paint bowl sat empty now, its contents having served their purpose in preparing these men for the trial ahead. Outside, the sounds of an enemy army moving into position grew steadily louder. The creak of leather armor, the whisper of weapons being drawn, the low voices of men preparing for violence. But inside the chamber, Nordgard's defenders felt something their enemies lacked: the absolute certainty that they fought for the right reasons. Whatever the cost, whatever the outcome, they would face this day with honor and determination worthy of their ancestors. The sun was rising, and with it came the test that would determine whether Nordgard remained free or fell to those who valued power over principle. But as Halrik looked around at the painted faces of his comrades, he felt something unexpected. Not fear, but anticipation. Today, they would find out what they were truly made of. The signal fire blazed atop the highest watchtower like a star fallen to earth, its smoke column rising straight and true in the still morning air. For 3 generations, this beacon had served as Nordgard's call to allies, its light visible for miles across the fjords and mountains. Today it would summon whatever help might come, though Halrik knew that salvation would ultimately depend on their own courage and cunning. The first wave of Bloodaxe warriors emerged from the forest like wolves scenting prey. Their red and black banners snapped in the morning breeze, and their war cries echoed off the surrounding cliffs as they advanced toward Nordgard's walls. Thane Ragnar had positioned himself on a hillock where he could observe the battle, his massive frame unmistakable even at distance. The enemy leader clearly expected this to be a brief, decisive engagement. 200 in the first assault, Magnus reported from his position on the eastern wall. "They're keeping their reserves hidden, but you can see movement in the tree line." Halrik crouched behind the stone parapet, studying the enemy formation through gaps in the fortification. The Bloodaxe warriors advanced with confidence, their shields locked and their spears glinting in the strengthening sunlight. They had numbers, they had experience, and they had every reason to expect victory against a smaller force trapped behind walls. Archers. "Mark your targets," Halrik called out, his voice carrying clearly along the defensive positions. "Wait for my signal, then make every arrow count." The plan required precise timing. Instead of meeting the enemy at the walls in traditional fashion, Nordgard's defenders would use their mobility advantage to strike where least expected. The walls would serve as bait, drawing the attackers into position for the real assault. "Signal the forest teams," Hildrik ordered. Eric the Wise raised a horn to his lips and blew a series of short blasts that would be heard by the concealed warriors positioned throughout the surrounding woodland. These men carried the responsibility for the most dangerous part of the plan, attacking enemy supply lines and command positions while the main force was engaged. The Bloodaxe charge reached the base of Nordgard's walls with thunderous impact. Grappling hooks flew through the air, followed by scaling ladders and siege ropes. The attackers moved with practiced efficiency, their coordination speaking to extensive battle experience. "Now," Halrik shouted, Nordgard's archers rose from concealment and sent a withering volley into the packed enemy ranks. At the same moment, the forest team struck the enemy's rear positions, emerging from hidden positions to assault supply wagons and reserve formations. The tactical surprise was complete. Thane Ragnar had expected a defensive battle fought from fixed positions. Instead, his forces found themselves attacked from multiple directions by an enemy that refused to stand and fight in predictable fashion. Halrik led a contingent of 20 warriors down from the walls, through a concealed postern gate, striking at the enemy's left flank while they were still focused on the scaling attempts. His father's battle-axe swept through enemy ranks like a scythe through wheat, each blow calculated for maximum effect. For Nordgard, Magnus roared from the walls, his voice inspiring the defenders to greater efforts. The cry was taken up by warriors throughout the battlefield. Men who had trained together, lived together, and shared the bonds of community fought with a unity that their enemies couldn't match. Where Bloodaxe warriors fought for their Thane's ambitions, Nordgard's defenders fought for their homes and families. Astrid appeared at a strategic moment, leading a group of women who had volunteered to carry supplies and tend wounds. Her presence near the fighting added another dimension to Halrik's motivation, not just protecting his village, but protecting the woman who represented his hopes for the future. "The eastern attack is failing," she reported breathlessly, "but they're reforming for another assault." Halrik looked toward where Thane Ragnar still commanded from his hillock position. The enemy leader's posture showed frustration rather than concern. This wasn't going according to his expectations, but he still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. "Phase 2, Halrik called out, signaling for the planned withdrawal. The defending warriors began falling back through predetermined routes, maintaining formation while drawing the enemy deeper into terrain that favored the smaller force. Each step backward was calculated, each position abandoned, only after extracting maximum cost from the attackers. But as they reached the prepared secondary positions, Halrik realized something was wrong. The enemy pressure was intensifying rather than decreasing, and new formations were emerging from the forest, reserves that intelligence hadn't detected. "They have more men than we thought," Magnus said grimly, joining Halrik at the new defensive line. The signal fire still burned atop its tower, but no answering flames had appeared on distant peaks. Whatever alliances Jarl Einar had negotiated, help was not coming in time to affect this battle. "We adapt," Halrik said, though he could see the concern in his companions' faces. "The plan was always about making victory too costly to pursue. We just need to make it cost more." As the Bloodaxe forces regrouped for their next assault, Halrik studied the battlefield with fresh eyes. The morning's fighting had proven that unconventional tactics could succeed against superior numbers. But it had also revealed that their enemies were more numerous and better prepared than anyone had anticipated. The real test was about to begin. The victory banner flew defiantly above Nordgard's long hall, its fabric torn and stained, but still proudly displaying the golden dragon coiled around the silver tree. The banner had witnessed 7 generations of triumph and tragedy, and today it would oversee the most crucial battle in the villages. History, a contest that would determine whether Nordgard's traditions survived or died with those who defended them. The second assault came with renewed fury as Thane Ragnar committed his reserves to overwhelming the stubborn defenders. Fresh warriors poured from the forest in waves, their war cries echoing across the battlefield as they sought to crush resistance through sheer numbers and ferocity. Halrik found himself isolated near the village's central square, separated from his main force by the chaos of combat. Enemy warriors pressed toward him from 3 directions, their weapons glinting with deadly intent. His father's battle-axe had already tasted blood this day, but the weight of leadership meant every personal risk carried consequences for everyone depending on his survival. Stoneshoulder. The challenge came from across the square, voiced by a massive warrior whose red-bearded face bore ritual scars, marking him as one of Bloodaxe's elite champions. "I am Grimvar the Bone Crusher," and I claim the right to face you in single combat." The formal challenge created a momentary lull in the surrounding fighting as warriors on both sides recognized the ancient ritual. Single combat between champions could sometimes determine the outcome of larger conflicts, and both armies paused to witness this potentially decisive encounter. "I accept," Halrik replied, though he knew the tactical implications were complex. Victory would inspire his forces and possibly break enemy morale. Defeat would leave Nordgard without its war leader at the moment of greatest need. They circled each other warily, two giants whose personal contest would echo the larger struggle between their peoples. Grimvar wielded a massive sword with practiced ease, his movements showing the fluid grace of someone who had survived countless battles through skill rather than mere size. The first exchange of blows sent shockwaves through both combatants. Grimvar's sword met Halrik's axe with a ringing clash that spoke to the quality of both weapons and the strength of the men who wielded them. Neither gained immediate advantage, but the testing had begun. Around them, the larger battle continued with desperate intensity. Magnus Bloodfist led a counterattack against enemy forces threatening the Long Hall, while Eric the Wise coordinated the defense of non-combatants who had taken shelter in the strongest buildings. Astrid moved through the chaos with remarkable composure, tending wounded warriors and carrying messages between defensive positions. Her presence seemed to inspire everyone she encountered, reminding them what they fought to protect. "Your tactics are clever," Grimvar admitted as they fought, his sword seeking openings in Halrik's defense. "But cleverness cannot overcome destiny. Bloodaxe is meant to rule this region. Destiny belongs to those who earn it," Halrik replied, his axe turning aside a thrust that would have ended the contest. "Not those who try to steal it from others." The philosophical debate continued through crossed weapons, as each champion sought to gain both physical and moral advantage over his opponent. But as the combat intensified, Halrik began to sense something beyond mere individual contest. This fight represented everything he had learned about leadership, sacrifice, and the courage to stand for principle despite overwhelming odds. A moment of opportunity arrived when Grimvar overextended in a powerful overhead strike. Halrik stepped inside the attack and drove his axe deep into his opponent's side, feeling the blade bite through mail and flesh to find the vital organs beneath. "Well fought," Grimvar gasped as he fell, his eyes holding respect rather than hatred. "Your village chose its champion wisely." The victory sent a surge of inspiration through Nordgard's defenders, while simultaneously breaking the morale of many enemy warriors. The sight of their champion falling to the village's war leader suggested that perhaps this battle would not be the easy conquest they had expected. But Thane Ragnar was not finished. The enemy leader descended from his hillock position and began organizing a final assault with every remaining warrior at his disposal. This would be the decisive moment. Either Nordgard's defenses would crumble under overwhelming pressure, or the attackers would exhaust themselves against resistance that refused to break. "Form the final line," Halrik called out, gathering his surviving warriors around the victory banner that still flew above the Long Hall. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment." The assembled defenders represented every aspect of Nordgard's community. Veteran warriors and eager youngsters, craftsmen who had taken up arms, even elders who refused to retreat when their home faced destruction. They stood together not because of orders or duty, but because they shared a common commitment to protecting what they had built together. Jarl Einar appeared at Halrik's side, his ceremonial sword ready for the final confrontation. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "know that I chose my successor well." As Thane Ragnar led his forces in one last desperate charge toward the village center, Halrik felt a moment of perfect clarity. Win or lose, they had proven that character could stand against overwhelming odds. That principle could resist the pressure of mere ambition. The victory banner snapped in the wind above them, torn but unbroken as the final test began. The new walking staff rested against the great chair in Nordgard's Long Hall, its surface carved with fresh runes that told the story of a young warrior's journey from strength to wisdom. Halrik had crafted it himself during the long months of rebuilding, each carefully shaped curve representing a lesson learned through trial and sacrifice. Unlike the ancient staff that had concealed Jarl Einar's identity, this one bore no deception. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a symbol of leadership, earned through character rather than inherited through tradition. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Nordgard, and the village bore the scars of that conflict with quiet pride. New timbers reinforced walls that had been damaged during the fighting, while fresh gardens grew where enemy camps had briefly stood. The rebuilding had been more than mere reconstruction. It represented a community's commitment to preserving what they had fought so hard to protect. The great hall filled slowly as villagers gathered for the ceremony that would formally mark the transition of leadership from one generation to the next. Jarl Einar sat in his ceremonial chair for the final time, his weathered hands resting on the arms that had supported 15 years of difficult decisions. His face showed contentment rather than regret, the satisfaction of someone who had guided his people through their greatest trial and seen them emerge stronger. "My friends," Einar began, his voice carrying easily through the assembled crowd, "we gather today not just to mark the changing of leadership, but to celebrate what we have learned about ourselves and our community." The faces in the audience reflected the full spectrum of Nordgard's population. Veterans who had fought in the battle sat beside craftsmen whose skills had rebuilt their home. Children who had hidden in fear during the assault now played freely among the benches, their laughter a testament to the security their defenders had purchased with blood and courage. Magnus Bloodfist wore his silver arm ring with genuine pride, having proven his worth not through political appointment but through leadership under fire. The experience of real combat had tempered his earlier arrogance into something more valuable, wisdom backed by proven courage. Even Bjorn Ironhand had found his place in the new order. The young warrior's fierce spirit had been channeled into training the next generation of defenders, teaching them that true strength came from protecting others rather than dominating them. Halrik Stoneshoulder, the Jarl continued, "Approach and receive the symbols of your authority." Halrik rose from his seat among the assembly, still feeling the weight of responsibility that had settled on his shoulders during those desperate hours of battle. The mail shirt that Astrid had given him bore new dents and repairs, marks of the conflict that had tested every principle he held dear. The ceremonial transfer began with the presentation of the Jarl's seal ring, its golden surface warm from Einar's finger as it passed to his successor. The raven, perched on a sword, seemed to approve of its new bearer, the ancient symbol ready to guide another generation of decisions. "This ring has sealed treaties and authorized justice for 7 generations, Einar said formally. "May it serve you as faithfully as it has served those who came before." Next came the ceremonial sword, its blade polished to mirror brightness and its edge sharp enough to cut sunlight. The weapon represented the authority to protect and defend, the ultimate responsibility of leadership in a world where strength and justice often intersected. But it was the final exchange that carried the deepest meaning. Eirik the Wise stepped forward carrying a simple wooden bowl, the same vessel that had held war paint during the battle's preparation. Now it contained earth from the village's boundaries, soil that represented everything they had fought to preserve. "Leadership in Nordgard has always been about service," Eirik said, offering the bowl to Halrik. "This earth reminds us that we are stewards of something greater than ourselves." Halrik accepted the symbolic earth and scattered it around the base of his new walking staff, binding the symbol of his authority to the land and people he was sworn to protect. The ritual was ancient but felt newly meaningful, charged with the knowledge of what such service might require. The ceremony concluded with a feast that lasted well into the night. But Halrik found himself stepping outside to stand beneath the stars that had watched over countless generations of his people. The fjord stretched before him like a mirror of eternity, its dark waters reflecting the lights of a village at peace. Astrid joined him in the quiet space between Longhall and harbour, her presence bringing the same sense of completion it always had. Their wedding had taken place 3 months earlier, a celebration that marked not just personal happiness, but the community's commitment to future generations. "No regrets about the path that brought us here?" she asked, taking his hand in hers. "None," Halrik replied, meaning it completely. "Everything we went through, the deception, the testing, the battle, it all led to this moment and this understanding." "And what understanding is that?" He considered the question, while watching fishing boats bob at their moorings, their crews safely returned from honest work that fed the community. These simple scenes of peaceful life represented everything worth protecting, everything worth sacrificing for. "That real leadership isn't about commanding others," he said finally. "It's about serving something larger than yourself, even when that service costs you personally." In the months since the battle, word had spread of Nordgaard's successful defense against overwhelming odds. Other villages had sent delegations seeking advice on tactics and alliance. Young warriors arrived asking to train with the defenders who had proven that character could overcome mere numbers. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition had come from an unexpected source. Thane Ragnar himself, recovered from wounds sustained in the final assault, had sent envoys offering formal peace and acknowledgement of Nordgaard's independence. The gesture represented more than mere politics. It was recognition that some communities earned respect through their principles rather than their powers. Halrik and Astrid walked back toward the Long Hall, where the celebration continued. He noticed an old man sitting on a bench outside the baker's shop. The stranger wore a simple brown cloak and leaned on a walking staff carved with intricate runes, his bearing suggesting both weariness and wisdom. "Grandfather," Halrik called out respectfully, "do you need assistance?" The old man looked up with eyes that sparkled with familiar intelligence. "No help needed, young leader," he replied with a smile. "I was just remembering a morning when someone stopped to help a stranger fix a broken wagon. It seems that kindness has grown into something remarkable." As the mysterious figure disappeared into the night, Halrik understood that some lessons never ended, that leadership was a continuing journey rather than a destination. The walking staff in his hand would guide that journey, but the true authority would always come from the character revealed when no one was watching. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns, and Nordgaard slept peacefully under their watchful guard.